In the brutal winters of the Second World War, when temperatures plunged far below zero and winds cut through clothing like knives, thousands of soldiers faced a silent killer that claimed more lives than bullets: exposure. Frostbite, hypothermia and dehydration stalked both sides of the front lines from the Eastern Front to the Alps. Yet among the chaos and cold, a peculiar survival trick emerged, one that blended chemistry, endurance and human ingenuity. Soldiers called it the salt-sweat method, and for many it meant the difference between freezing to death and living to fight another day. For the first gripping minute, picture this in your mind. A trench buried under snow, men huddled together, their canteens frozen solid. A soldier rubs his arms and face with a strange mixture of coarse salt and water from melted snow. Within minutes, his skin reddens, his blood starts to surge, and the biting numbness gives way to a strange, lingering warmth. It wasn't magic, it was science, improvised from necessity. This was the salt-sweat method, and it became one of the most unusual yet effective field survival techniques ever documented during the war. By late 1942, soldiers stationed along the Eastern Front faced the kind of cold that split wood and turned exposed flesh black in minutes. Supply lines were shattered, winter clothing was scarce, and rations were often frozen stiff. Soldiers began experimenting with anything that could generate warmth: animal fat, alcohol rubs, even urine. But one group of Soviet medics noticed something interesting. Miners and dock workers who had previously rubbed brine or salted water into their skin to prevent frostbite seemed to suffer less tissue damage. That observation led to what became known as the salt-sweat technique, a crude, field-made way of stimulating blood flow in freezing temperatures. The method quickly spread across units, later copied by German and Finnish troops who had observed its effects. It was never officially written into manuals, but soldiers swore by it. In diaries recovered after the war, several veterans mentioned rubbing salt to fight the freeze as part of their nightly routine. The science behind it was surprisingly sound. When salt is mixed with a small amount of water and rubbed vigorously into the skin, it creates a mild, exothermic, heat-releasing reaction. The coarse grains also act as an abrasive, stimulating capillaries near the surface. This combination increases circulation and produces a tingling warmth, enough to keep extremities alive in sub-zero conditions for a short time. More importantly, salt draws moisture from the skin and nearby tissues, slightly dehydrating the surface but preserving deeper warmth by forcing blood toward the core. The trick was to use just the right balance. Too much salt or too long an application could burn or damage skin. But when done carefully, soldiers found it could stave off frostbite long enough to make it through a night patrol or guard shift. It was never meant as comfort. It was survival through controlled pain. The brief sting of salt was a small price compared to the agony of losing fingers or toes to frostbite. Interestingly, modern field survivalists still recognize this physiological principle. Friction-based heat and stimulated circulation remain vital in cold weather survival, though today's medics use safer methods like massage or hand warmers. The wartime salt mixture simply forced that same effect with the few materials available: salt, snow, and grit. Accounts from veterans describe several variations, but the core process remained the same. Soldiers first melted snow over a small flame or in a metal cup over a candle, creating lukewarm water. A handful of coarse salt, often from ration packs or preserved meat, was stirred into the water to make a heavy brine. Using strips of cloth or bare hands, they would rub the mixture into exposed areas: arms, legs, neck, and sometimes the chest under clothing. The rubbing motion created friction, while the salt accelerated blood flow to the skin. After the initial burning sensation, a deep warmth spread through the limbs. Soldiers then quickly wrapped the treated areas in dry cloth or layered fabric to trap the residual heat. In extreme cases, the mixture was used before sleep to prevent limbs from stiffening in cold trenches. Soviet medics combined it with a rub of rendered animal fat afterward to seal the skin from wind exposure. The result was crude but effective. Men stayed alive where others froze beside them. While no one suggests rubbing salt water into your skin daily, the underlying principles of the salt-sweat method have practical survival lessons even now. First, it shows how circulation is the body's first defense against freezing. In survival scenarios, anything that promotes blood flow, movement, friction, or alternating heat exposure can preserve limbs when conventional heat sources fail. The second lesson is resourcefulness. These soldiers didn't have specialized gear or chemical heaters. They turned a basic commodity into a tool for survival. Modern off-grid enthusiasts can adapt this wisdom safely. For example, when camping or working in sub-zero temperatures, gently massaging limbs or using salt-infused warm compresses can increase surface warmth without electricity. You can also simulate the friction method using cloth soaked in saline water and wrung out before applying it to pulse areas like wrists or ankles. Always finish with an insulating layer to prevent rapid cooling afterward. It's about understanding the body's natural responses rather than relying solely on gear. The salt-sweat method stands as a reminder that survival isn't always about tools or training. It's about adaptation. In 1943, men trapped in freezing winds didn't have the luxury of choice. They had to invent comfort out of pain and warmth out of chemistry. Their resilience came from understanding the environment and using what nature provided. That mindset is timeless. Every generation faces its own form of hardship. Whether it's natural disaster, isolation, or cold wilderness, the lessons of those who endured the harshest conditions still apply. The key is to stay aware of your body, your environment, and the simple reactions that can mean the difference between life and death. The salt-sweat method is more than a story about soldiers. It's a story about human instinct fighting back against the elements. If this deep dive into one of World War II's strangest and most ingenious survival methods taught you something new, don't let it end here. Try small, safe experiments with heat retention and circulation to understand what those troops learned the hard way. History is full of forgotten techniques that worked, not because they were comfortable, but because they were necessary. Here on Relic Logic, we bring these hidden fragments of wartime innovation back to light, connecting the lessons of the past with the realities of modern survival. So, if you value this kind of knowledge, real, raw and field-proven, make sure to subscribe, like and share this video with fellow history and survival enthusiasts. Because as long as we keep these lessons alive, the spirit of endurance that saved lives in the freezing winds of 1943 will never be forgotten.